was a historic year for our country, and perhaps more broadly for the world, in fact, as Canada joined a handful of other jurisdictions to open the Pandora's box of euthanasia to its citizens. In that year, only 1,018 people were successfully euthanized. A short 6 years later, that number has since climbed, and that was 2022, the last year it was recorded, to about 45,000 people. Only 6 years, and it went up that much. Nearly 5% of the deaths in BC and Quebec are now attributed to euthanasia, which is so-called medical assistance in dying, or MAiD. And these numbers continue to climb in every province each year. Unlike the introduction of legal abortions in Canada, the inauguration of euthanasia has been met mostly unchallenged. More waves are made by McDonald's when it reintroduces its McRib sandwich every few years. In fact, I just saw yesterday that some data has come out and showed that between the 2021 year and the 2022 year, that MAiD across the country increased by 31%. We are making waves. I'm speaking today about this topic because the time is high, and it needs a bit of time to speak about this. It can't just be done in the presence of a catechesis, but in fact, actually, the time is now. And so allow me, if you will, to speak today on this. So why is it? Why do we lounge indolently in the face of this revolutionary upheaval in human existence? Compassion being equated to taking a life. If you don't hear how antithetical this is to Christ and His gospel, I'm afraid you may very well be descending into the very same contorted and twisted life of Zacchaeus prior to his profound moment of repentance before Christ. Prior to Christ, Zacchaeus was a man with many of the same impulses that we share. The gospel today is not speaking about someone whom we can all comfortably sit back and judge for his misguided ways, but rather for his relatability. Zacchaeus, like every human ever created, was wired for worship. And it is precisely our objects of worship which will ultimately shape and guide our lives. Of course, in his case, Zacchaeus had many relatable old favorite gods. The God of comfort, of security, stature, and mammon, all of whom were on the altar of his soul. Wherever he went, it was his reliance, or more truly his slavery to those idols which he diligently tended to and would inform his daily living. The heavy-handed oppression of his kinfolk through his job of tax collecting likely began with trepidation, as all sins do. But in time, he undoubtedly was unfazed, and quite likely even thought highly of his hostile behaviors over that of his poorest brethren. Everybody is a saint, or at least approaching sainthood in their own minds sometimes, aren't we? We do the same with our own sins if we were to be honest with ourselves. For millennia, the sins of grandeur, those being lust of wealth, pleasure, honor, and power, have been old hat, though quite effective. Generation after generation would demonstrate their compulsion and slavery to these objects of sin. But modernity has brought yet another and potentially more destructive sin to dominate the hearts of men, that being the glorification of self-determinism. In many ways, this sin has not only appeared, but has become crowned as the highest good. That man should be free to choose and determine his or her life as he pleases, provided it isn't hurting anyone, or so the flawed logic attempts to purport. Self-determinism. The rise of self-determination in this last century was born out of the fruits, I would suggest, of the rise of atheism itself. So many of us, without really knowing, have been, as one modern theologian recently remarked, bathed in the corrosive acids of relativism, materialism, and scientism. Being denied, sadly on the other side, starved as it were, the transcendent, the good, the beautiful, and the true in its authentic form. Raised in such a culture, even for the faithful, even for all of us, the aesthetic perspective might seem, the atheistic perspective rather, might seem natural. Without any objective standard of good, why would Zacchaeus ever need to repent and seek out Christ? He was doing what he thought was good, and that we should have respected. And everybody else who might have judged him, well, that would have been wrong because that is their opinion of good. If that were the case, we wouldn't have this feast this day. The moral underpinning that is sufficiently good to do as one pleases, particularly if it doesn't come into conflict with secular laws, then Zacchaeus might never have repented, as I just mentioned. And this episode would have been very different. Imagine Zacchaeus measuring Christ's Beatitudes against his own moral subjectivism and saying to Jesus, well, I respect that that's your opinion. Blessed are the poor. That sounds really nice, but that's not mine. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Well, sadly, many of us do that very same thing all the time. We think if it were Jesus who were saying it to us, we of course would accept it. But when it's some other form of Christ, say the church, we say, well, we respect that you feel that way, but with all due respect, that's your opinion. There's a problem there. The passion, I call it a passion. It is sin of self-determination thrown onto its head. I'm not talking about self-determination to do the good, but rather self-determination to choose your own good. Is not one we should look over passively. It is a real and present danger in our times, and I do believe that it has the right requisites to degrade humanity till we are literally no more. This polite, who am I to judge culture flies in the face of our theology, of our cosmic connection to one another. My life is inextricably tied to the welfare of all of my brothers. It is. I cannot choose my own good that in some way is personal to me and isn't related to you. It's not true. I will not live fully free until even my brother out there is fully free. And to imagine it is in some way polite, kind, or even loving to allow him to determine his own good, which is not in line with the actual good, is to neglect him, thus showing I don't really love him. If we let people choose the good that they like, and that good is, say, for example, I don't know, eating Dorito chips until they go blue in the face, and we say that's for him, the kind of libertarian kind of thought. And he dies because all he is eating Doritos until the day that he passes this life. It means we didn't really love him, despite the fact that we say we are respecting his choice. It's a bit much, and especially when you get to even more morally heinous things, like euthanasia. It is not loving to passively allow someone to destroy themselves as I carry on by worrying about my own affairs. And yet, this has become the world we live in. Worse still, if I do decry the sin of self-determination, I do so mostly, this is what we do, mostly by pontificating about it on the internet or amongst our friends, rather than actually living it. This is perhaps where a lot of the Orthodox, their Achilles heel is. We'll talk about how self-determination on its head is wrong, but we will certainly do nothing about it. Returning now to euthanasia. In a few short months, and this is why this matters, in a few short months, the federal government is set to expand the eligibility of MAiD to those suffering with mental health issues, such as depression. Rhetorically, nobody put up their hand, but if one were to ask how many people in here might have at one point in their life been diagnosed with depression, you might have then qualified. You can imagine how many hands would raise. You might then qualify and be sitting in front of a charitable doctor who wants your self-determination to be activated and perhaps might even float. MAiD. Think about the insanity. We've gone too far. Though I would say any reason for MAiD, any reason for euthanasia is too far. And we can talk about that at another time, of course. In many jurisdictions south of the border, billboards have begun to appear advertising the very words. This is actual, I'm not just, by the way, I hope none of you feel like this is churchly fear-mongering. Don't take it as such. This is a call to action because it's important. And we sometimes understand the importance of things after it's been said. Although I would like to think that I'm being prophetic, I'm not. It's already here. But here, there are billboards down south that say the words, "My life, my death, my choice." Following on the heels of the eye-rolling slogan, "My body, my choice." Words flying in the face of St. Paul when he taught in his letter to the Romans, "We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. So whether we live or we die, we are the Lord's." When euthanasia was first allowed in Canada in 2016, it might be said that it flew under the moral radar of pro-lifers because we fell prey to believing that perhaps in serious and foreseeable terminal health issues, MAiD could be seen as merciful. If it's going to help Grandma, who's suffering so much, then we can allow this, can't we? Because it's just for this one time. Who wants to see Grandma suffer? We went from seeing euthanasia as only being used in extreme situations to health issues with no foreseeable date of death, and to now standing at the threshold of general ubiquity of individuals diagnosed with non-terminal mental health issues. Please tell me that that sounds crazy. It should. I wonder, is this a thinly veiled attempt to save public health care dollars at the expense of lives of the most fragile and the vulnerable? How insidious is it that as we avail death for the most marginalized in society, we make ourselves feel better, patting ourselves on the back and calling it compassionate care, imagining ourselves to be saints for protecting the self-determination of an individual to end his or her life. Of course, much lip service is offered up to say that the system is flawless and does not allow suicidal people to pass through its rigorous check and balances. But in fact, actually, and I'm not, this isn't just, mom and pop's pro-life digest, but in fact, there's already scholarly research to suggest that those checks and balances are there's some serious doubt being cast upon them and upon those claims. To love another person, dear brothers and sisters, is to will the good for that person. To love another person is to will their good. Love isn't an abstraction. You must will to love another person, say your child, say your parent, is to will their good, is to activate and to make sure that their good can come forward. That is love. It isn't to leave them alone to decide that they can just do what they like. That isn't good. The good ought to be an objective good, pointing to God Himself. It is not good to leave people to their devices, no matter how much they insist. It is not at all compatible for Christians to watch the world burn all around them and to say, "I respect the freedom of the arsonists to burn their houses down." Christ could not have passed by Zacchaeus and would have respected his choice to remain a slave and extortion and robbery. True love for Zacchaeus sought to free him from sin, desiring that all men be free, is to order all things to the supreme value of good, who is God. Moral relativism praised by society will certainly hurt those among us with the smallest voices, the little ones. Christ warned us, in fact, the ones that Christ had warned us not to hurt, because it would be better to tie a millstone to our necks and to cast ourselves into the sea than to see them be hurt. Let's be loud and clear. MAiD is eugenics. That might sound harsh. It's true. It's true. I would wonder how many people do you imagine are more likely at Good Shepherd to opt for MAiD than people who live in Rosedale? I would like to know, and how soon it would be that the people at Good Shepherd will choose it again over the people at Rosedale, even if they both ultimately choose it. How long will palliative care support the people at Rosedale where people feel at Good Shepherd will not? Tell me that's not eugenics. Those are the little ones that will be on the front lines. Rather than force society to feel the burden of the cross of our sick brothers and sisters, we will offer death and clear our plates of their cries. Self-determination turned on its head is our collective sin. I am also to blame that my brother chooses death over life. I am. I'm not pontificating about people out there that are bad. I'm talking about myself. I fear, dear brothers and sisters, that eventually and perhaps sometime soon, if left unchallenged, if we don't care, if we let people do as they please, we will find ourselves surrounded only by those cultural elites, the best looking, the strongest, the most popular, the smartest, and the richest. Can you see how that sounds terrible? I don't know if I want to be around only those people. For individuals who wouldn't describe themselves in those ways, you may feel even more oppressed because your neighbors are no more. Those people who might be at Good Shepherd, who have no interest necessarily of MAiD, but finding that their ranks among their neighbors are smaller, will feel a lot more oppressed. Death itself will change, because even those who live long lives will choose MAiD in order to manicure death, their own death. Our impatience with weakness will grow even firmer, and ultimately the lack of diversity of life will cause us to become intolerant towards anything which does not compete at the highest level. We will judge those who we see as using up valuable public resources selfishly for their disabilities. Brothers and sisters, we must stand athwart this issue with all our will, all of it. Like I said, in a few short months, the government is set to review MAiD, euthanasia for those suffering from mental health issues. I think that this is a threshold and, like I said, a moment of a Pandora's box that if we don't call back to the good, in 30 years, we will regret that we didn't. I might have explained to you once that in recent times there was an Armenian family that was published about, a reporter had reported on, that the young man was a young man who had several disabilities, none of which were terminal, because this had already passed the time where it had to be terminal. But he had several disabilities, that he was granted the opportunity to receive euthanasia. He was about 22. And he lived with his mom and his older sister. And the mom and the older sister began to worry that he was sort of becoming a bit darker and he was changing. They couldn't understand why. So one day they had plotted to look at his email, and they had discovered that he was somehow approved for MAiD and set for a certain date. The mother had, of course, legitimately freaked out. What 22-year-old knows the highs and lows of life? Seeing that this person had so many disabilities, and that, in fact, what was imagined in his mind to be going on was that a lot of his friends who he went to high school with were now graduating with girlfriends and boyfriends, and were entering into the career field, but he was not, had made him legitimately feel like life is not for me. And so his mom did the good, did what Christ did with Zacchaeus, to will his good. So she wanted to stand athwart. She wanted to help him. And so she did. In fact, actually what ended up happening, I won't get into the details of the story, but led to the doctor ultimately canceling his procedure, so-called procedure, at that time. You know, this, I would be very amazed to imagine that somehow the whole world will feel this around us, but it won't happen to people in our churches. We're not going to have parents that are going to have 19-year-olds or younger making bad decisions. I doubt it. So, if this is truly a concern, and using today's gospel as a muse of Christ's will to go to Jericho to find Zacchaeus and to will his good, maybe we should also begin to think about doing the same for our brothers and sisters, for ourselves, for our future progeny, our children, our grandchildren. Like Christ, and let us, like Christ, seek the will of the good of Zacchaeus, all the Zacchaeuses, our Zacchaeus, the Zacchaeus of our own heart, rather than to protect his fallen choices and his sins, because he too has come to seek and to save that which was lost. And glory be to God forever. Amen. So while we're still getting adjusted, dear brothers and sisters, just two qualifiers to the sermon today, small things. One, I have neither I nor anybody in this parish has any sort of has anything against people at Rosedale. Just in case I was, it sounded like I was being sort of divided, those Rosedalians or whatever. No. All of us are children of God, and all of us are worthy of that. And all I was expressing there was perhaps people with more resources might receive greater hospice care or advocacy and palliative care or some other kind of avenue of love that would suggest to them that, in fact, yes, while you're suffering and while there is pain, in fact, not to give up. And so that's all I was mentioning there. The other thing that I want to underscore too from the sermon is that hopefully you don't take away the message as being one of politics, of political, now let's all vote for our favorite party or whatever. That is not at all what was being attempted there. It's a human issue and it's a Christian issue. Because it is a human issue, the fact that therefore it will of course be one of great importance to the church. So we need to think as human beings who love other human beings, who love the good, what it is that we must do. Okay, so I just wanted to put those two qualifiers there. Today we celebrate the great feast of Saint Ephraim the Syrian, one of the harps of the Holy Spirit, and also Saint Isaac of Nineveh. Interestingly, of the latter individual, he is so beloved, so holy, that somehow every high church prays him as a saint, even though he comes after divisions. Aha. That's interesting. Therefore, he must be some very incredible person. What you don't want to do with both of these guys is be like, I recognize their names. What you do want to do is pick up the prayers of Saint Ephraim and let them be balm over your soul, and pick up the wisdom of Saint Isaac and let them enter into your heart and enjoy them. I want to also point out, as a good segue too, we actually are so lucky as to have some of the progeny of Saint Isaac of Nineveh in our parish. The Hassou family are from Mosul. Mosul was once called Nineveh. And so how interesting is that we have the family with us, and we can sort of get a bit of a sense of who Saint Isaac was by seeing his children many centuries later. I also want to take this opportunity, as you have seen perhaps in the bulletin, so Allah and Jesus are about to, Allah specifically is about to begin chemo on February 4th. By the way, Allah is a really funny guy. He's very strong, and I get the sense that he doesn't always like me talking about him. But anyways, I will anyways because we're brothers, and he can't stop me because I'm up here. So I will. But I wish for all of us to take very seriously, and I've seen this happen in the past. We don't know how it is that prayer affects those, because it's not for us to sort of delineate. We pray, it's like putting a quarter into the machine, God receives the quarter, and then does as He wills. It doesn't work like that. But we do know that God asked us to pray. And in this way, we sort of wrestle with Him, and we live with Him. And that living with Him causes fruits in ways that we don't fully understand, and we might never understand. But I would ask this, and I know it's a peculiar request, but I believe that it is a good request. I would like us, for the duration of the months that Allah will be going through chemo, which as I understand might be 4 to 6 months beginning February 5th, that we commend the intentions of him and his family to the Saint Agatha of Rome, who, as you might have seen in the bulletin, why Saint Agatha of Rome? Because that's the day that he begins his treatment. Saint Agatha was also accredited of being she's sort of the second of the patronesses of Italy, and she had protected a town from destruction by her prayers when Mount Etna had erupted so many centuries ago, a year after her passing. So, with that, let us commend also our beloved brothers and sisters to the protection of Saint Agatha. Okay? This is a good way for us to understand our Orthodox faith, that it isn't just us alone, but us with the saints and with our intentions there. Okay? We don't just have them up on the walls because isn't that lovely or isn't that cute, but they're with us. Okay? And so let us, on this occasion, have her as the patroness also of this little Mount Etna in the life of our beloved brothers and sisters. Okay? Very good. Yesterday we laid to rest Dimitri. So please remember him in your prayers. You might also have seen in the bulletin that there was a brother in our church. His name was William. I don't know how many of you remember William, but if you would have remembered him, it would have been in the early days of the church. William wasn't part of the faithful of our community. He wasn't communing, he wasn't Orthodox. But I can tell you that in the early days of the community, and I can tell you as the priest of the community, and I might not have shown you this, but if I did, then okay, but if not, I'll tell you. It was sometimes a little bit, it felt like we were skating on thin ice, especially for me. And if I didn't tell you, I was quite worried. There was a bit of a frenetic nervousness that was inside of me that you might not have been able to see, or you did, and anyways, I'm not a good poker face. But interestingly, every time, especially people who would be unusual, that would come to support the community. In the case of a person like William, they put big wind in our sails, and in my sails. And if you ever benefited, or if you have, from St. Silouan, and likely not too much from myself, but at least from St. Silouan, from this parish community, you owe it to a guy like William, who in the first days of us being here was setting up tables and sort of moving around. He was a bit of a person who would move like this, and holding a cigarette, as I said, in one hand, and a coffee cup in one hand. He was going to tell you about life. You owe it to him to pray for him, because he was one of the people that helped build this place for you, especially if you come here post-COVID. If you're post-2020, then you might not have seen him, but he was there before you, and he helped, even in his small way, by setting up tables. I was so encouraged by that. So we have him also to pray for. Yet another person who is absent from among us today and has been perhaps quietly suffering for several days, and I don't think he would mind me saying, is Nikolai Berg. Nikolai's dad, Nate Berg, passed away suddenly this past week. He was 52 years old. And I can tell you, Nikolai, as you well know, those of you that know him as a young man, for any of us who have lost a parent, especially at a younger age, there is a kind of a tiny sense, just a tiny sense of orphanness that sort of comes. Huh? So, pray for Nikolai, pray for Nate, all right? And, if you have the time, maybe you reach out to Nikolai and express your love for him, okay? Keep that in mind. So there's many people to pray for. I will include them in the bulletin, lest we forget to pray for them. But Nate is his father's name. Okay? All right. Now, also dovetailing on today's sermon, I don't want us to become Orthodox people who decry the darkness. That is way too easy. Orthodox people love decrying the darkness. We love getting behind our keyboards and saying, you know what else sucks? And quickly typing enter, space bar, enter, and then just like going crazy on our things. No. It's not about decrying the darkness, but it's about lighting candles. It's about allowing for the creativity of God in places where it seems impossible. And so the little ways that we do this in our church, and I agree, it is little, but hopefully in time God will bless the little. Monday nights continue to need your help. They need some beauty. So come and light a candle among those who come here, among the others who might be alone, and let us enjoy the fair together, the banquet of God. You'll notice outside that we still have some empty spots on the sign-up sheet. It's quite possible that Deacon Michael and Bishoy in a few weeks will change that sign-up sheet into something else. But for now, those empty spots need to be full because there's a lot of anxiety on our hearts. Okay? Go outside, put your name down, let's finish those lines, okay? Let's see these meals be filled out. And in a few more weeks, we'll tell you exactly how it is that you can help with meals. We're going to change it up so it's going to be a little bit more easier, okay? This Wednesday, there will be no catechesis or liturgy. However, the presentation of the Lord in the temple, the feast falls on Friday, and we will do a Vesperal Divine Liturgy this Thursday evening, beginning at 7 p.m. There will be no catechesis this week. But Thursday, 7 p.m. One last thing I want to say about that is this. I was just telling those who attended catechesis this past Wednesday that the beauty of the church is that if you want to understand what the church believes, if you want to understand how the church understands Scripture, how the church reads the Old Testament, you got to come to the services that are irregular. We don't read the Old Testament during the liturgies. Right? It just doesn't happen. But we do during Vespers, especially for the feasts. So, come this Thursday. Listen attentively to the prophecies read during Vespers and understand the beauty of the feast of the presentation of the Lord. Okay? So that's my challenge to you all. Dear brothers and sisters, I don't want anyone to leave. Let's all gather together. Let's enjoy each other's company and enjoy the great banquet that we have. And one last thought from Paulina.
Just a reminder that the choir has a choir practice today. We're going to start at 1 sharp over there in the Fosse room. And then when things have calmed down a little bit here, we're going to migrate to the stands. So you have about, let's say, half an hour to eat, plenty to socialize, and then please make your way over there. Thank you.
I also, the cobbler's in-laws also don't wear shoes. As the cobbler's family doesn't wear shoes. So I want to also welcome my father and mother-in-law, Father Bernard and Presbyterian Linda. You'll notice that they're here among us today. And it's always an encouraging thing. Like I've said in the past, actually, we have a lot of people who are connected to our community. And we're so fortunate to have this fatherhood and motherhood even from without. This also segues into another thing. The deacon's family, through the priest, are also cobblers, peoples who don't wear shoes. I want to ask all of you to pray for Father Rodian. Right now, Father Rodian, which is Deacon Michael's father, is in hospital right now, and so please keep him and the family in your prayers. God be with you all. and let's all enjoy each other's company in the presence of the Lord.